How does the South African context influences the approaches to Holocaust education?
It brings a lot of new challenges because South Africa is very far from where the Holocaust unfolded. The target population was very different from the population that we are working with, so there is very little common points. So we need to first of all explain to the visitors why it's important for them to understand and what there are, what kind of effects or in what way the Holocaust and the Second World War has shaped the reality of Africa and beyond. So it certainly is very different or somehow different from how we teach about the Holocaust in Europe or in the US, because of the population that we work with is very, very different.
How do young South Africans perceive the issues of genocide and deportations?
We try to explain, to look at certain similarities and differences. If you think about the end of the war, in our Northern Hemisphere narration, this is the moment of the victory of the good forces over the empire of evil. And obviously in our Eastern European context, under the communism regime, the story is more complicated. But generally, the good guys defeated the bad guys. And the problem in South Africa is that the good guys that were serving in the British Army came back from the war and then replicated a lot of the Nazi policy, this time not targeting the Jews but the blacks. So if you look at the laws that were introduced during the creation of the apartheid system, this is late 40s and early 50s, a lot of them will be a copy and paste from the Nazi legislation or American legislation toward the blacks. So it's a mind-boggling that at the time when we're people that liberated the Jews from Mauthausen are then coming back and are persecuting the people in much similar way. The goal is different. The goal is not physical elimination. The goal is not to kill the blacks or not to kill all the blacks, but to kill them working and benefiting the white population. But nevertheless, a lot of the system elements are similar. So again, so it's mind-boggling for this audience, because the good guys then turn out to be bad guys and create a system which is affecting our audience in many ways. Even though apartheid ended 31 years ago, the economical, social situation of the big majority of the population on the ground has not improved.
Also, I would like to ask you, what insights could Sybir Memorial Museum gain from South African educational initiatives?
That there are those connection points, and then the exhibition, there is this part that follows the story of children, of women that were hosted and spent time in the camps in Africa, and that's the story that resonates within South African audience. This is the story that some of the people remember. There are the kids and grandkids of some of those people that ended up in Africa during the war are still there, and for them this is a terribly important story. They were brought up in Africa, they are now South Africans, but the link is there. So I think it's interesting how what are the echoes of that story that one can still find in faraway places like Africa, and those echoes, those crumbles of the past are still there. So that's perhaps the one thing that South Africa can contribute. The echoes of those stories, documents, photographs, letters that people still possess from the time when they were or the parents or grandparents were refugees. And also, the question of in what way that story has shaped them as a second or third generation. Whether that's something that is being discussed and how different it is from the discussions that the Sybiraks who are here or in Siberia or are in other places, New Zealand, are having. I think it's perhaps be interesting. And second of all, with changing populations in Poland, with influx of kids from Ukraine, from Belarus, from other places, it's not increasingly often we'll face the situation when it's not going to be a story of the Poles that we tell to other Poles, but the story of the Poles to the people that themselves are refugees. not the Polish ones. So it's not their story, but they will see reflections of their own story. So how do we reinvent our story in a way that it is told to other people who suffered very recently and will have a very different connections to that story than a Polish, ethnically Polish kid from Warsaw or Białystok.
What role can comparative history, for example, here in our context of Polish deportations, can play in creating the narratives about global genocide, how it can contribute?
Well, it's a tricky question, because one answer would be there are some universal patterns, and certainly we as a human being should be interested in what's happening on the other part of the world. We should be interested in something more than suffering of our own. But this universalization is also problematic, because it sometimes removes the very identity of the victims. It removes the simple fact that Jews, European Jews, were not killed because they were European, but because they were Jewish. So I think it's also a problem when we try to turn those stories of particular violence, of the particular suffering, into a global story, because then to do it we need to make sure that we can relate to the victims, and sometimes we cannot, because there are differences. So in terms of the Holocaust education, we often see that Holocaust exhibition starts with the representation of the victims. We want to humanize the victims and change the 6 million into a face, a story, a smile, a photo. And what we've seen in many places is that those photos are actually not representative for most of the victims. That those photos would present assimilated, wealthier or Jews who were actually a minority of the victims. Instead, they should show out of whatever it is, 10 victims, 7 of them should be Eastern European poor Orthodox Jews, with whom today we would feel no connection at all, because we are not Orthodox, because we look better, because we look different. But we're not showing those images in exhibitions. We show a person that will reflect the visitor, and that's a problem. And because it's creating a false idea of the history.